Hi there, and welcome to The Router, the official podcast of the UQ Computing Society, where we explore the human side of tech. I'm your host, Matt, and I hope you've been having a wonderful summer break. Today I'll be having a chat with Nick Lambourne, former president of Uqcs and currently interning at Atlassian as a site reliability engineer. He's done pretty much everything you can do during his time at university, and he's here to share his advice for making the most out of your university experience too. All right. Welcome to The Router, Nick.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Firstly, for the rest of the audience, could you introduce yourself and your history?
Some people who've been around a while might know me. I was president of Uqcs in 2019. And before that, I was sort of around the periphery. And then last year, I stuck around to help out what's now the old committee with running things. So if you've been to some of the UQCS talks, I've organized a lot of those. My experience with the university is a bit different than most. I've been at UQ and having just left last week. I've been at UQ for 10 years, which means that I've seen a lot. I've missed out on a lot of opportunities, but I've been able to take advantage of a lot of others. In that time, I've studied psychology and finance to begin with, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do after school. And then when I finally found out what it was, that I wanted to spend my life working on computer science. And that's sort of how I ended up involved in UQCS.
What was the thing that I guess after like four or 5 years of studying psychology and finance, what was the thing that made you change your mind and go into computing in general? Is there like a catalyst for that?
There was, yeah. So I've sort of gotten a bit bored. I was bored a lot during those years in finance and in psychology. So I did a lot of stuff on the side. I worked a fair bit, mostly sort of customer service jobs, but then moved into more sort of retail and more substantive jobs. Like I did a bit of lobbying. I worked as a technical advisor. But the thing that sort of solidified this idea that I'd had of sort of being interested in computer science was taking this one particular online course, CS50, Harvard, the Introduction to Computer Science, offered through Harvard and taught by this amazing, like crazy, passionate lecturer named David Malin. And taking that course was sort of, I took that course 6 months before I was due to finish my first sort of double degree there. And I knew at that time that I needed to go and do this instead. This got me excited about like the prospect of work or the prospect of study even in a way that I hadn't been before. So that was really the catalyst, and doing that and then getting more into Python and then starting to use Python in my work as a technical advisor and as the manager of a network of LED billboards. I set up this Django-based application to help me do my job, and it was then that I could really see the true, the true power of what I could learn in computer science.
And with that experience, I guess, of those degrees, those past degrees, do you find yourself ever using things from those nowadays, or are there any experiences that you've gathered from that time that you still?
It's only ever tangential. Of course, I wish that I had discovered computer science. I was initially put off because I didn't want to. I did like computers. I enjoyed building computers and playing around with them as a child, but I was worried when I was at school that doing that for work would sort of ruin the fun. So obviously it was a long time before I realized my mistake there. And I do wish I had have gone straight into computer science or computer science and math straight out of school. But I mean, there have been parts of it. The application is only ever tangential. It's little things like being familiar with the accounting terminology or things like a bit of the organizational psychology stuff that I did helped when I was working with people on the Uqcs committee in particular. That I guess it did help, but probably weren't worth the 5 years that it took to get there.
I guess tell me a bit more about UQCS, the committee, I guess. So you started your university journey. When did you get involved with UQCS first?
So I'd done this course. I'd started doing a bit of web programming, and I was looking for ways to get involved because I knew that the way that I'd gone about my first degree or first double degree wasn't the way to do university. I'd been there long enough and I'd missed out on enough opportunities that I knew that I had to do something different. So even before I started in what initially was software engineering in 2016, sort of in the later part of 2015, I started to look for ways to get more involved. And I came across the Computing Society, and it was in a very different state to what it is now. My first ever UQCS event was actually their AGM in that year. And I went along, and the entire event was, the vast majority of the event was them trying to find 30 people to sign the attendance form to keep the club going, which when you look at UQCS now is kind of hard to imagine. I mean, there's always that fear that you're not going to have enough people, but it hasn't been a real risk for many, many years. So that was my first engagement. And then after that, it was into 2016. It was attending the events. They weren't quite as frequent back then, but the vibe was there. And I guess I kind of felt like I had found my people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which in contrast to finance and psychology, like I just couldn't say, like I certainly couldn't tell you now, but I even would have been struggling to tell you then a single person who I had studied with, apart from one person that I'd known from high school in those previous 2 degrees. But yeah, I got more involved. I got to know the president at the time, Taylor Manderson, and sort of got in with that circle, I guess, and I developed this network of people that would come to be my sort of core friendship group. And again, that wasn't something that I'd experienced in either of the 2 previous degrees. And I guess the other thing was that I was in engineering, so I went through those first year engineering subjects, and there's this cohort vibe that develops around engineering because you are effectively traumatized into bonding with your fellow students by the courses. They force you to do group work with people you've never met. They have a ridiculous amount of assessment, and if you're not relying on your fellow students, then it's unlikely that you're going to get through it all. So there were a few sort of UQCS people or people that would become UQCS members that I met through there as well. And yeah, just developed this sort of network. And that went on, and obviously there were a few years there where the club started to gain a bit of momentum, particularly under Taylor. society started to grow, obviously there's this external influence sort of building up technology and computer science that meant that there were all of these students coming in, and we had more numbers, more resources, and I got more involved, attended more events, got to know more people, and again got in with this sort of core group who would become my close friends. And then at the end of 2018, Cameron was stepping down or graduating. Everybody was from the existing committee was leaving, and I had decided to run for president. Now that felt quite radical to me because I hadn't held a committee position before. I'd run the year before, I think, and been knocked back. It is the voting process is a little bit of a popularity contest. We've tried to obviously address that as the years have gone by, but I hadn't served before, so I felt like it was a bit of a long shot running for president. But I got voted in by a margin of 1 vote.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a very close thing. And talking to people after, I was sitting down with someone a couple of days ago, and they're like, "Oh, I could have been that deciding vote," and I was a bit worried because like that 1 vote margin, and sort of it wasn't contentious, but it was competitive. But Jack, who was the 1 vote shy, ended up becoming secretary, and I was a bit worried about how that relationship was going to go if that was where it was starting, because we didn't really know each other before then. But over the course of the time since that year in particular, when we worked so closely together to change the society and keep it going, we've developed into really good friends. And then we worked together as interns at Canva, and it was just, I don't know, it developed into what was effectively a competition, developed into just this really, really good friendship. And I wouldn't have been able to make all of the progress that we made and do all of the things that we did that year without Jack's support.
Out of the things you did, I guess, as president or with Jack as secretary, what is the thing or things that you're most proud of achieving during that time? Is there anything that you can like point at and say, I did this, that's something that future UTCS, I guess, iterations will be?
I mean, it's a little bit complicated because it's something that I'm both proud of and I guess regret slightly because we may have taken it a little bit too far, but turning what was sort of at most weekly, typically sort of bi-weekly events into at least 2 events a week every week throughout the year, or at least throughout the semesters, meant that the students and the members got a lot more exposure to the talent, because I was effectively relying a lot of the time, again, on that network of friends that I'd developed in UQCS, most of whom had gone on and graduated and were working at places like Atlassian or Canva, Microsoft, those kind of places. But it did put a lot of pressure on the rest of the committee and Jack and I in particular, in terms of organization. And we were just wrecked after a year of that, and then sort of, I guess, setting the bar so that the subsequent committee, I guess, that I was also on and organizing events for, felt like that was the standard that needed to be maintained. And I guess the other downside of that is that I was much better at organizing the technical talks than I was at the social aspect. And I can see now that what UQCS needs, particularly in the environment that we're in now, is that social aspect, more than they need to be learning about Kubernetes or tmux or whatever. So I think the regret is the balance in terms of workload and social versus technical. But I am also proud that we were able to pull that much off, because over the last 2 years, it's probably been nearly 100 events by the time you tally them all up that have been organized by UQCS, which is just a massive increase. And I guess the other big thing that I'm proud of is that growth continued. Now, it's difficult to say how much of that growth is due to the influx of comp sci students, and how much is due to us doing a better job of advertising. But it was nice to finally, with the help of Madhav's last-minute recruiting efforts, reach 500 paying members before handing it over in 2019.
Yeah, I think the influx of members has been really good, and I think with COVID, I guess it kind of affected the turnout, but even the online turnout was, I think, really good, and I think the consistency was good as well. Yeah,
that was something that I struggled with a lot, was dealing with the shift in turnout, because obviously, as the person organizing events, I was relying on turnout as my metric of how interested or how engaged people were, and going from sort of a 40-person sort of median in person to sort of struggling to get 20 people to watch when it was live online was a little bit difficult to swallow. But then you'd see things like, over the course of that week, 100 more people would watch it, and you'd feel slightly more redeemed, slightly more like the effort that you put in was worth it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think the way that, since the events were streamed and recorded, I guess that also affected the way that, members would consume the talks and things like that. There would be, I guess, less incentive to watch them on live, but because they'd know that they would always be recorded and available to watch whenever it was convenient. So yeah. I guess the metrics, it's kind of hard, but I do still think that despite the circumstances, it's been quite a good turnout overall if you add up all the streaming and all the recorded views.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it gave us the opportunity to go out and buy equipment so that we can stream and have this catalog of resources that we can link people to. So even like, I'm hoping that we continue the tradition of things like having a Vim and tmux talk at the beginning of each semester that 2310 runs. But if we ever didn't, or for whatever reason, like the recording failed or whatever, we have something to link back to. And I think those resources will probably outlive any of our tenure with UQCS. So
I guess it sounds like UQCS has been a really big part of your university experience. I guess that wasn't it though, right? Like there was other stuff too. Other experiences. Would you go into those?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously UQCS has been a massive part of my life for the past 2.5 years, and even before that. But there have been other aspects of university that I think people don't like. Again, me going through my double degree, it sort of took 4.5 years before I was even aware that these things were available, and some of them weren't. For finance or psychology, like computer science and technology is somewhat special in that it has this focus on it right now. That may not always be the case, but it does mean that there are opportunities that you can take advantage of. So a couple of the big ones for me were, I'll go sort of shortest impact to longest. But there's a space at UQ called Idea Hub, and they describe it as this pre-accelerator. And it's a little bit cringy coming from a comp sci perspective. And a lot of the stuff will be familiar to anybody who's gone through sort of early years business education. But they offer this program where they will effectively talk you through how to take an idea and turn that into a business or a startup. And you go through this process, and then you once you've completed it, I think it's like one night a week for 5 weeks or 8 weeks, and you just go and you'll do some you participate in some cringy activities like design jams and that kind of thing. But you'll actually talk to entrepreneurs, and it's a worthwhile experience, particularly if you don't have that business background. But it's even more worthwhile because when you finish, you become eligible to go on these trips. Now, they're called startup adventures, and they go to different places. So there's Shanghai, Tel Aviv, San Francisco, and Singapore, I believe, were the ones that were available last time I checked. And what it was effectively an all expenses paid trip to one of these commercial hubs where you were placed with a startup. Now, those startups sort of varied from the couple of people in an office to a couple of hundred people, where you're starting to wonder if the word startup still applies. But this trip, and it's not just going there and working and getting experience working in a company, particularly a small company where you're forced to wear many hats. Is just incredible. But then you also, we were taken by the coordinator, Nimrod Kleiman, who I believe now runs UQ Ventures, which is sort of the parent organization of this Idea Hub. And he, in addition to us doing our sort of 8 to 9 hour work days in these startups, I worked with a med tech startup called Patched, with another one of your podcast guests, where this is the CEO. And the work was interesting. I was doing training optimization for some machine learning for medical technology. So their goal is to detect sepsis and other illnesses using vital sign data and sort of recurrent neural nets, effectively. And so I got to do that work, but then Nimrod would take us out in the evenings, and it would be we'd go to like WeWork, or we go to Uber, and there'd be networking events or fireside chats, or we went to UC Berkeley and sat down, and there was a fireside chat with someone from Sequoia Capital. So getting this experience, getting this exposure to this world was just phenomenal. Now, I was at the time and remain a little bit skeptical of the startup space, mostly because running a startup and being a part of a startup takes a lot out of you, and I don't always have that to give with other obligations. But it's just like, it was a phenomenal experience. This was just after I'd been elected president of Uqcs, so it made for some very long days. I'd do sort of 8 or 9 hours doing this machine learning optimization, and then I'd go and do those networking events, and then I'd come back to the hostel where we were staying and sort of sit up until 2 or 3 in the morning organizing UQCS talks for the coming semester, or market day or whatever. And it was a lot of work, but it was incredibly worth it. And the people you meet there and work with will become part of this network that you develop. And what I've discovered, again, over an obscenely long time, at university is that the network is the most important thing. Like the classes, a lot of it you can sort of take or leave, but the network in particular is incredibly valuable. And this was one of the best experiences that I'd had for developing that network. I arrived back from that at like 6 a.m. and then had to go to market day, which thankfully Jack had done a lot of the organizing for. So it was a very hectic beginning to the semester, but absolutely would recommend going and following up or trying to get into this program. The other big thing that, again, I think people don't realize is there, is research. You can get involved as an undergraduate, and it's particularly valuable when you're an undergraduate and you don't have very much experience, and you're ineligible for the vast majority of technical internships because they're only looking for penultimate year students. So what you can do is you can do in the winter or summer break, instead of sitting at home and bemoaning your lack of eligibility for internships, you can
as many do, including
well,
me.
yeah. I mean, it's disappointing, and I think it's a failing of the industry that they're only willing to invest at that point where it's most likely they will get their return. I mean, it makes sense financially, but it's I don't know. It seems a bit too much like the Netflix "we don't do interns at all" kind of attitude. But yeah, this research opportunity. So it's in the winter break in the middle of the year or the summer break at the end of the year, and it's sort of 4 or 5 weeks for winter, or I think you negotiate it, but it's like 8 to 12 for summer, and they pay you. The pay, it's certainly not internship pay, or but it's enough to get you by. But it gives you access to, again, this network that's critically important. So my first experience with this was applying. I was on exchange at the time, so the application process was a bit dicey. You normally get interviewed by Zoom or something, and I had to organize a time that would work. But I ended up in a position where I was working with one of the UQ ITEE researchers on. They have these robots. They call OP, and what they are is effectively a couple of tablets secured to this wooden frame that gives it sort of a almost Bmax kind of vibe. If Bmax was flat for some reason, but you interact with it, and the idea is that you participate in these activities and these games on these tablets that will teach you language. And they're sort of targeted at Australian Indigenous languages where there aren't a lot of resources. So my job was to build something that turned linguistic transcription files, these ELAN files, into resources, like the correct format for resources. So I built a little Python Qt application, and the researcher who was supervising me, Gautier Durantin, was sufficiently impressed that he invited me to come back as a research assistant to work on other projects for the lab. So that was how I got started in research. Now, while the summer research and winter research scholarships don't pay very much, the research assistant position is basically work whenever you want during the week, and we will give you the same rate as tutoring, sort of guaranteed up to a certain number of hours per week. So for me, I think that was 15 hours a week that I could spend working on these projects. Now, the work will vary based on the researcher and the project. Initially, I started out cleaning up some of the code that they'd already written. Now, if you have the misfortune to interact with academic code, it's very different to sort of industry code. You'll have single letter variables, or in one particularly fun case, every variable being named data, regardless of what it contains. Yeah. So cleaning that up and making it a little bit more professional, a little bit more extensible was my first job. And I spent a few months doing that before I was moved to another project working on speech recognition. So developing a framework for speech recognition, developing speech recognition models based on, again, this transcribed data. You develop a buzzwordy machine learning model to effectively recognize language. And obviously your results depend on how much data you have and how you get set up. But the idea was that if people had the data but don't have the technological sophistication to work out the underlying library, then we can give them a nice, pretty GUI that lets them build their own models and interact with it and use it with sort of minimal technical background. And I still work on this project today. I'm still sort of a research assistant. I did go in for another summer scholarship following the winter one, which I was also doing while on that trip to San Francisco and newly president. So again, it was a bit hectic.
It's
but
crazy.
In my experience, it's almost possible to make anything work. If you're like, I was worried about going on the San Francisco trip, having just sort of taken on this new role as a research assistant. But my boss was fine with it. He's like, do what you can, and then we can sort of, if you want to, you can make up the hours when you get back, or you can work from there if you need to, or if you have the time. So that flexibility is fantastic, particularly when you're a uni student and you've got other deadlines, and the ability to not do work for a couple of weeks is just fantastic. And I would recommend it to anybody.
I guess that comment about you can make anything work, I think, is a good thing to say, because like when you have all these different opportunities, I found you get a lot more mileage out of just taking them and seeing where they go than to, I guess, see an opportunity and say, oh, I don't have time, or oh, I won't be able to, to an extent, of course. Like, you want to be able to manage your time, but
you need to keep in mind things like your mental health and your ability. Like, you need to get sleep and stuff. But in my experience, people are much more willing to compromise and work with you than you'd expect. And sure, it might lead to an awkward conversation. We have to say to somebody, "Oh, I'm sorry. I need to cut down on my obligations," and I've had to do that as well, because in what I would call downtime, where I didn't have a few jobs on the go, I reached out to some startup founders at Uqcs iLab and worked with them. But eventually, when better paying work came along, I had to turn around and say, "Oh, look, I'm sorry. Here's what I've built for you. I hope it helps. I need to go and focus on other stuff." And I've never had someone not be okay with that. They might be disappointed, but in my experience, they rarely even show that. So yeah, I guess the biggest thing for me was that I didn't know about these opportunities the first time around, so I was determined to take advantage of everything that I could. And you don't really, apart from LinkedIn stalking people, you don't really know what's available. I mean, I have a feeling it's just a problem of there's too much on the go at once for the university to communicate this all very effectively. But it certainly feels like if you're not paying attention, you can miss out.
I found that LinkedIn stalking is a wonderful way to find out opportunities for myself. I guess I found some I engaged in even like, yeah. But I guess um, there's also this experience. I guess both of us have a little bit of familiarity with in different ways, and that's I guess a semester exchange. Um,
Uh,
yes. I guess
yeah.
can you tell me about that?
Um,
So
yes. For those unaware, COVID has destroyed and cruelly torn apart the plans of many people
yes.
who intended on going on exchange. And fortunately, I did my exchange back in 2018.
Mm.
But if I know it's difficult to talk about it now, and it's difficult to say, yeah, go out and do this now. But as far as experiences that are going to broaden your horizons, I guess, for want of a better phrase, it's difficult to go past exchange. And a lot of people look at exchange and immediately write it off as something that's infeasible because of the financial burden, but there's support there from the federal government. You can effectively get $7,000 or $8,000 added to your HEX, but then they give you that money to use for facilitating your exchange. You add that to the exchange grants that are normally provided by the university, which I think are most students, if I understand correctly, get $1,000, which is what I got. And if you're particularly academically gifted, then you're entitled to a $3,000 grant. But it's difficult to state how valuable the experience was. I know a lot of people use it as an opportunity to learn another language. For me, it was an opportunity to go overseas and study things that weren't offered at UQ. That was my first motivation. The second motivation was that I wanted to travel, and particularly travel the United States, because I hadn't been there since I was 3 years old. I tried to make the most of it. I had planned and set up for exchange first at the University of Connecticut, and then a second semester straight after that at the University of Edinburgh or the University of Glasgow. Obviously, because it was still 6 months out, it was all still pending. But I didn't make it to the UK because I got sick after my first semester. But the first semester alone was definitely worthwhile. I really enjoyed my time at UConn, but I also traveled around it. So I landed in New York. I think it was 9 days before semester was supposed to start, and traveled up through Boston and Rhode Island, sort of seeing all the sites, doing the Freedom Trail. And I didn't get to see as much of New York as I would have liked because there was a snowstorm, so I didn't make it to Columbia. But finally got to UConn. The university experience is very different over there. It's sort of mind-boggling. Like the take that they have on it is that if you're paying that much to go to university, you should focus on university and all of the things university has to offer. I guess the norm is that people weren't working, which compared to Australia was very different. There are also a lot less people, or a lot smaller proportion, who would sort of commute to stores where UConn is sort of out in the sticks of Connecticut. But it's a little town and university set up, and you get assigned a dorm, which again is wild by comparison. I guess it's not, it wouldn't seem that strange to people going through college at UQ.
But like college is the minority, I guess. Yeah.
So it's sort of flipped on its head over there. And I don't know. It was weird being like food was all included. They just had these refectory outlets that were open all the time. You go in and fill up your tray, and they'd like bottomless ice cream and pancakes every morning for breakfast. It was kind of wild. It was also kind of insightful as to like how that would impact your health and physiology, but it certainly impacted mine. But I guess those things were weird, but there were also things that were, I guess, fantastic. I was there during what they call the spring semester, but it snowed every week, which again,
I mean, you're in Connecticut. So
yeah,
I guess,
yeah. I mean, it makes sense like that, but it's also a weird thing to experience coming from spending most of your life in Brisbane.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially when you've just taken to shaving your entire head, the feeling of like snowflakes melting on like a bald scalp is quite concerning. But there are also facilities that we didn't have, things like on-campus skating rinks, massive sort of, again, this was pre-COVID, but big rallies when there were basketball games and things that were just eminently uncomfortable, like cheerleaders and like the whole Greek scene. But there are also like very interesting cultural things. Like you down one street, one of the streets that hemmed in the university proper, there was religious institutions for every major faith, just down a whole street. And there was a big Jewish population at UConn. So I got to talk with some people about Judaism in a way that like you're just not exposed to here, I guess. And the courses were very different. Courses like, so I set out to take courses that weren't offered at UQ. So the two of those at the time were theory of computation. What's theory of computing at UQ, 2048. That was taught very differently there. It was basically a mathematics course. So we went through Turing machines and lambda calculus and push-down automata and those kinds of things. And those have become a sort of a passion of mine since then. The course was quite difficult, and I'm not a particularly diligent student. I'd also done something quite foolish. This was the first time in something like 12 years that I hadn't been employed. So I decided to take all of that extra time, given that I was newly free, and invested into doing more uni work, which I guess isn't the normal thing. Most people would travel or do like social stuff. But I don't know, I was trying to take advantage of stuff like they offered a graduate class in quantum computing that they would let me take. And I also took information security, networking and operating systems because I'd heard that they weren't the best at UQ. So that I guess, and that would remain my recommendation. Try and pick subjects that either aren't offered or aren't taught well at UQ. But I did do some traveling. I did most of my traveling before and after. I spent a month after sort of traveling back across the top of the states. So I went up to Columbus, Ohio, went to a music festival, and then I went on to Cleveland, Ohio, and went to US PyCon and met some interesting people, sort of fundamental to, or like that you hear about on the internet, but then they're suddenly real.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Like the Michael, who runs a long-running podcast on Python taught Python to me, who I'd been listening to for years. At that point, I ended up having dinner with him at PyCon. It was just wild. And I met Kenneth Reitz, who was there. I think he was working for DigitalOcean at the time. I saw Guido van Rossum. It was just very, very intense. Where did I go? And then my trip after was basically visiting US universities. So I went to the University of Chicago and Washington and Stanford, and just sort of tried to take in the culture. I also tried pizza in all of the major US cities. And
which one was the best?
I have to say Chicago. There's that sort of like deep, crusty sort of thing. I don't know. It's just,
the deep dish.
Yeah. And I got to take in like art museums and stuff. Just, I guess, the culture that I've always found kind of lacking in Australia. There is also unpleasant parts to being in a kind of like we take a lot of stuff for granted here in Australia. Things like healthcare and homelessness and stuff are much more prevalent in the US. As I went down the West Coast from Seattle, it just got worse and worse. And it's hard to take in when you've been relatively isolated from that in Australia. It's not that it doesn't exist here, it's just that it's less prevalent, and it's you sort of, depending on where you go, you're not necessarily exposed to it. But it was very confronting, and it did very much sour my view of the United States. I went over there with, I guess, rose-tinted glasses. I don't regret doing it at all. I mean, the friends that I made and the stuff that I got to study at UConn and all of those cultural things that I got to see made it all much more worthwhile. But there are things that aren't positive that are a part of those experiences as well.
Yes, yeah, the good and the bad, and I guess you don't really see the bad until you spend 6 months living there, right?
Yeah, because I mean, it's easy enough. Like, obviously, I've been on. I have visited the States since for that startup adventure trip, and it's quite, again, like prevalent in San Francisco, but where we were somewhat isolated from it, and only being there for 4 weeks, it was sort of not enough for it to, I guess, creep under your skin.
I guess after all those experiences, you've just graduated, which I guess is really exciting. Firstly, congratulations.
Thank you.
And secondly, what's next?
So I'm moving. Excuse me. I'm moving down to Sydney. I'm currently doing an internship with Atlassian, and then I'll be looking to start a grad role in February. But I'm also looking forward to being able to have a bit of a change of scenery. After 10 years at UQ, I don't necessarily want to stop learning. I mean, the appeal of undergraduate coursework is kind of faded a tad after a decade, but I do need to take on honors. And I'm planning on doing that at UNSW. And hopefully I can, because I had a bit of a strange situation where I transitioned from software engineering, where I had to do a thesis, and I did do a thesis, and then transitioned into computer science so that I could sort of leave early and get started on a career. But I have this sort of thesis hanging over my head, and I'm trying to get credit for that at UNSW, so that I can just sort of do my coursework and move on. And then from there, I mean, I'm hoping one day to do a PhD, but I suspect it'll probably be sort of part-time on the side of work. Yeah, so those are the plans. Guess we'll see how it all pans out.
You still, I guess, want to stay around in uni just a little bit on the side.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I ever want to stop learning. I've always been the kind of person who was motivated by deadlines and sort of keeping up with my peers and that kind of thing. So I've gotten better at learning on my own, but I do need, like, the PhD is the goal. The honors is kind of compulsory at this point.
Yeah. One final question I have. Is there anything you'd tell yourself, your past self, from when you first walked into, first walked through those UQ gates? I don't know if UQ really has gates, but you know what I mean. Is there anything you'd tell yourself, any advice as you just walk out of high school and start uni? I mean, or to anyone listening to us who might be in the early stages of university and wanting to make the most out of their time, anything you'd say?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is that I would recommend taking some time to work out what you like and what you could see yourself doing. I didn't do that coming out of school. I just did a mix of what I fell into with psychology and what one of my parents did with finance. And that's not the way to go about it. I'm jealous of the people that grow up knowing that they want to be a doctor or something. They grow up knowing that they want to be a civil engineer. But if you're not one of those people, like I wasn't, you really need to take the time to explore the options. Now, you can do that at university. Just enroll in a sort of general purpose degree, like a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science. You can always change your mind later. Take things, try them out, and you'll probably fall in love with something like I did with computer science. Obviously, I was doing it externally, but I would have saved a lot of time if I had have done that exploration first rather than out of boredom 4.5 years into 5 years of a degree. It's not a problem if you change your mind. But yeah, do that exploration, fall in love with something, whether it's computer science or, like one of my friends, comparative religion. You can make a career out of practically anything. It's just a matter of finding what it is that you can do and be happy doing, I guess. Obviously, it'd be ideal if you found that thing to be computer science and joined UQCS, but it's not for everybody. Everybody should have the ability to do it, but it's just a matter of finding what makes you happy.
Just exploring all those paths as early as you can.
And I mean, once you have found that path, look for people who are further down that path than you and ask them what they regret, or what they've done that they found to be advantageous. Find out where the opportunities are, because there might not necessarily be someone telling you or someone laying it out for you. You might have to seek that out. And I found that it's a lot easier to find that path, take on all those experiences, than to have to deal with the regret of having not even known that they existed years down the line.
Alrighty. Thanks so much. I've learned a lot listening to this, and I guess hearing about your experiences, and I'm sure a lot of other uni students will find it especially useful, and especially those, I guess, in the early time. But yeah, thanks so much for coming along.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Yeah. And also thanks for all the contributions you've made to UQCS through the past few years, and, helping it blossom into the society it is today. And I guess this shows. one of your, I guess, little contributions as well, getting this off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, giving UQCS has given me so much. It felt only right to give back, and I'd suggest. I guess that's one thing that I didn't say explicitly was that getting involved in the club, and anybody can run for the committee. Getting involved in that too is just one of the most rewarding experiences because you form again that network with those people that lasts forever.
All right. Thanks so much. And yeah, I wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Matt here again. I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of the listeners in 2020 for joining us on this new and wonderful journey. Over the past few months, Liv and I have had the honor to host this new form of UQCS content, and we think it's been a big hit, so thanks to everyone for all of your support. As I'm sure many of you are aware, it's holiday season coming up, and the router will be taking a short break over Christmas and New Year's to recuperate. We'll be relaunching in 2021 with our second season, bigger and better than ever, and hopefully with a nicer jingle. Until then, as always, come join our Slack community at slack.uqcs.org and follow us on our social media to keep up to date with all things UQCS. Have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, and we'll see you back in 2021.